Picture this. You're an investor halfway through your Nespresso, watching the State of the Nation podcast, waiting to hear how South Africa's new Land Expropriation Act will affect your billions.
So I applaud honesty, and I applaud the people that concocted the Expropriation Act for being honest as to what it is. Now you have to send emissaries all over the world to say this thing we've called an Expropriation Act, in fact, isn't an Expropriation Act, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But anyway, you have undermined any ownership of any kind of property in this country by passing that act. It's a complete economic killer.
That is a figment of your imagination. Read the legislation.
I've read the legislation. I've had experts here talking about the legislation.
Yeah, but you need to read it with intention, not with prejudice.
Okay, so
let me unpack the public interest. I mean, I've listened to you, on this one. Let me unpack the public interest. Very clear. Examples are even made. There's a dilapidated building in the CBD. We need to get student accommodation going with the increasing numbers of students that are accessing higher education, thanks to an ANC-led government that introduced the Tertiary Education Fund for South Africa, TEFSA, in the early 90s, which is a precursor to the NSFAS that we have today. How do I know that thousands and thousands of young people need accommodation? Because the doors of learning and culture, as the Freedom Charter says, have been opened. I know this. I sat on that TEFSA board as a student leader, representing students, which gave birth to the NSFAS. So there's a demand for student accommodation, and there's some dilapidated building in the CBD that can be converted, or in Braamfontein, or somewhere in Brixton. As you see, a lot of development is happening in that environment, changing the spatial patterns in the space. There is absolutely nothing dodgy about the Expropriation Act.
No, under those circumstances.
We have explained it.
Under those circumstances, right?
The
I fully agree with
public
you.
interest refers exactly to things like those.
I fully agree with you.
There is no public interest that says you'll just go and grab Makulu's house and take it.
If you decide it's in the public interest?
You would.
Why not?
Because there
Why
are.
not?
No.
Well, who decides what is dilapidated? What is the yardstick for dilapidated?
No, you are basically on a trajectory to pursue the argument of AfriForum and Solidarity and the DA. And that argument is...
Do you want to call the Ku Klux Klan? Keep going. Mahlengi.
No,
I mean, I don't know. You've obviously got an agenda here.
No. I don't have any agenda. Okay. My agenda is the ANC and communicating the message of the ANC, which is known to South Africa.
Right.
But you are saying exactly the things that they've been saying. I've been in debates on this issue.
And they're saying it because
and they go to the United States. You talked about the U.S. People going to United States. I thought I should react to that in line with your line of questioning. They went to the U.S. and said that basically farms, land, properties are going to be seized under the Expropriation Act. A total misrepresentation of that piece of legislation.
Are you
the
saying
public interest clause is not aimed at destabilizing society, cohesion. It's aimed at making sure that the land is available for the state for the purposes of development.
But now that's if you were in charge, right? But what happens if Jacob Zuma's in charge? Do you understand what I mean? Suddenly public interest becomes a different question. So let's just imagine.
Laws are laws.
No, this is a law that's open to interpretation.
So you just used a bad example, Jacob Zuma. Maybe you should use a more saner example.
I think I'm using that as an opposite example. Because he's the kind of, that's the kind of person that we have to write laws for.
Yeah,
right?
It could very well, by the way, be another, could very well be another right-wing extremism.
Whoever, exactly. Yes, therefore don't give them bad laws. Now,
think about that, the type that is pursuing. And I wonder if you'll bring them to your show to talk about the type that is creating an Orania and is seeking to extend the Orania to another Kleinfontein, which another new Orania, and basically people who are separatists.
Yeah, bad laws.
It's not about the law.
Well, you're saying what they're doing is illegal.
It's wrong.
Is it illegal?
No.
Okay, so there's a difference now between wrong and illegal, and you're saying now we can make a call.
Well, I
want to put this
I struggle actually. I actually struggle with your discourse because the discourse seems to think that the problems in South Africa are only limited to the wrongs of the African National Congress. The African National Congress has always considered the things that we failed to do correctly and how we've disappointed a lot of our people and in general the people of South Africa. Okay. You can go through so much of that publication, including our president says this regularly, but he says we are coming back, and we are coming back on an ethical footing, which is why I keep reminding you that this idea that ANC people are cadres and they're corrupt, all of them, is very wrong.
Okay, so let's do a little exercise, you and I, right? Mm-hmm. I hand over your phone number because I've got your number to an international investor. They contact you. They say, I am Mr. Big Shot from some country and I want to open a multi-billion-dollar factory in South Africa. I'm going to buy this land, which I've earmarked. I'm going to build a big factory, right? I'm going to employ thousands of people. But I need to know that nobody, not just you, but nobody could at some stage say, in the public interest, we might just want your big factory and your intellectual property. Can you guarantee me that you can't have it? Then he says, I'm going to bring in a lot of specialists, but I see that there's an employment equity tick box exercise, right, where I am being told who to hire, right? And I run companies all over the world, and nowhere am I told who I must hire. Should I invest in your country or shouldn't I? How would you answer that particular investor?
That you can go and invest in India or
elsewhere. So go somewhere else.
Yes.
Okay. So, well, we can see why we've got a growth rate of 0.5, 0.6%.
No,
okay. I think that's the.
No,
you've joined Dada Marero as the other honest politician because at least you've answered the question honestly.
If you are coming and now I see you're bidding for Starlink by Elon Musk.
I am.
You are. That's that anecdote that you're utilizing is that of the Starlink issue with Elon Musk. Okay, I'm saying here that anyone who wants to come and invest in South Africa must abide by the South African Constitution and the laws of the country. Okay. Any self-respecting country does that.
Okay.
That's not unique to an ANC-led government of national unity. It's just what it is.
And therefore, by that same logic, we must just be happy with no growth, economic growth in the country, because that's how it's manifested.
We must have growth.
Where's it going to come from?
And specifically inclusive.
Where's it going to come from?
Inclusive economic growth.
Where's it going to come from?
It's going to come from infrastructure development. Read the entire budget.
We've read the budget.
You've not read. Let me unpack the budget for you. Give me a minute to break it down for you because the obsession with the VAT issue is blinding, I think, your perspective. That budget is the most developmental budget you can ever find in South Africa. One, I'm now speaking about the expenditure side of the budget. The budget provides for increased access to education, particularly early childhood development. There are allocations made in that respect, which amounts to effective practical implementation of the Bela Act that you and the people that pursue this narrative believe that the Bela Act is problematic, which is aimed at strengthening access to early childhood development. And people are jumping up and down saying the Afrikaans language is going to be undermined by this Bela Act, and which were proved to be totally incorrect. Secondly, the budget aims at attracting and employing many health workers in order to address the shortages in our health system so that we can ensure that our people have access to health care in line with the dictates of the Constitution.
The question drops, how will this policy impact investment in the country? And Mahlengi Bhengu-Motsiri, the ANC's national spokesperson, doesn't flinch. She just says, investors can go elsewhere. Boom. Silence. Somewhere, a spreadsheet cried. That, my friends, was the moment. The kind of comment that sends boardrooms into chaos, WhatsApp groups into overdrive, and economists into therapy. Because when a key representative of the ruling party tells potential investors they're free to take their money and bounce, it hits different. It's like walking into a restaurant, asking about the food, and the waiter goes, if you don't like what's on the menu, there's the door. Now, let's be clear. This didn't happen at a rally, or in some leaked voice note. No, Mahlengi Bhengu-Motsiri said this during an official interview, on a widely watched podcast, with lights, mics, and thousands of viewers. And it wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was delivered with full chest, as if to say, yes, I said it. And what? So why did she say it? What's the context here? Let's rewind a bit. The Land Expropriation Act is the latest chapter in South Africa's long, painful, and complicated journey to address historical land dispossession. For centuries, land was taken from the majority population by colonial and apartheid forces, and very little of that land has been returned. So naturally, there's been growing political pressure to correct that injustice. The new act allows for land expropriation without compensation under certain conditions. It's been debated in Parliament, protested in the streets, and now, it's law. Understandably, foreign investors are nervous. Because nothing makes investors clutch their pearls like hearing the word expropriation. They imagine Zimbabwe 2.0, empty farms, and portfolio losses. So when the State of the Nation host asked Mahlengi how the act might impact South Africa's investment profile, it was a serious question. But her answer, that took it to another level. Instead of calming nerves or laying out a reassuring policy roadmap, she just shrugged and said, if investors don't like it, they can go invest elsewhere. The message was loud and clear, we're not begging. Now depending on who you are, that was either a bold defense of national sovereignty or a reckless dunk that missed the hoop. Twitter, as expected, exploded. Half the country applauded her for not bowing to outside pressure, and the other half asked, did she just tell money to leave? But let's dig into what's really going on here. This wasn't just about land or investment. This was about power, control, identity. Who gets to decide what happens in South Africa? The people who vote, or the people who own? From the ANC's perspective, land reform is not just policy, it's a moral mission. They've been promising meaningful land redistribution for decades. So if they back down now just to soothe investor anxiety, they risk losing the support of millions of South Africans who've been waiting for justice. On the flip side, without investment, the economy stalls, unemployment rises, and the very people they're trying to uplift are left worse off. That's the impossible sandwich Mahlengi is stuck in. She's got one hand on ideology, one hand on economic reality, and both sides are tugging. But let's be honest, the delivery matters. Saying, investors can go elsewhere, in such a dismissive tone, without nuance, without explanation, is like throwing a grenade into your own office. It creates unnecessary panic, because the message that was heard wasn't, we're going to balance justice with growth. It was, take it or leave it. And investors, they don't wait around for clarity. They flee at the first sign of turbulence. They don't read between the lines, they read headlines. And the headlines were brutal. Now imagine you're the CEO of a company looking to expand into Africa. Your options include Kenya, Rwanda, Nigeria, and South Africa. You're leaning towards South Africa. Great infrastructure, a skilled workforce, a sophisticated banking system. But then you hear a government spokesperson saying, essentially, we don't need your money. That's a tough sell to your board. And to be fair, the criticism wasn't limited to foreign investors. Local business leaders were just as shocked. They've been fighting tooth and nail to attract capital, to keep jobs in the country, to prevent further brain drain. And then someone from the top hits them with, they can go. But let's also look at the other side of the coin. There's something refreshing, albeit risky, about a politician not groveling for foreign capital. Because let's be honest, the global financial system isn't exactly a bastion of morality. A lot of those investment dollars come with strings attached, influence bought, and policies swayed. So when Mahlengi says, "Go elsewhere," what she might be trying to say is, we won't sell out our principles. And honestly, there's something to be said for that. For years, African nations have been told to privatize, deregulate, liberalize, and westernize. And the results? A few success stories, sure. But also inequality, exploitation, and mounting debt. Maybe she's saying, we're done dancing to someone else's music. But, and this is a big but, you can defend your sovereignty and be strategic. You can say, we're going to implement land reform in a way that is fair, legal, and economically sound. You don't have to make it sound like an ultimatum. Investors aren't allergic to land reform, they're allergic to chaos and unpredictability. What South Africa needs right now is confidence. Investors need to know the rules of the game, and that the referee isn't going to switch halfway through the match. They want clarity on which land can be expropriated, how compensation is determined, and how property rights will be protected. That's not selling out. It's just being a grown-up country with a grown-up plan. And if Mahlengi had said something like, our land policy is based on equity and justice, but we're committed to providing a stable and transparent environment for investment, this wouldn't be a national crisis. Instead, we're here trying to decode what "go elsewhere" really means. So what's the fallout? First, the ANC's own economic departments had to go into damage control. Quiet briefings were held, statements were issued. Suddenly, it was all. What she meant was, and, to clarify, you know the drill. Political cleanup on aisle 5. Second, opposition parties pounced. The DA accused the ANC of economic sabotage. The F said, finally, someone in the ANC grew a spine. And Action SA, well, they just asked for her resignation. Standard political theater. Third, and perhaps most importantly, ordinary South Africans were left confused. People want land justice, yes, but they also want jobs. They want a growing economy. They want to know that when their kids graduate, there'll be more than just internships and Uber Eats. And when the message from the top sounds like, we don't care if investors leave, that doesn't exactly fill anyone with hope. Look, Mahlengi's not the first politician to speak boldly and pay the price. And she probably won't be the last. But in a country as complex, diverse, and economically fragile as South Africa, words matter. Tone matters. Strategy matters.